Have you ever noticed that something happens in the world that affects you much more deeply than you expected? Maybe you see a story about someone being harmed. Maybe you hear a conversation about women's safety or bodily autonomy or sexual violence. Maybe you find yourself feeling intense sadness, anger, exhaustion, or even hopelessness. And you wonder, why is this affecting me so deeply? For many people who have experienced trauma, the answer is that our personal experiences are connected to the larger world around us. Our nervous systems remember the violations. When we have lived through experiences where our boundaries were violated, where we felt powerless, or where our autonomy was taken from us, witnessing similar themes in the world can bring those original wounds back to the surface. I'm Alison Batty-Capps. I am a licensed therapist, a wellness coach, a spiritual mentor, and the author of The Divine Within, Healing Ourselves to Heal the World. For over 25 years, I have explored healing through both my own personal journey overcoming childhood trauma and my professional work with trauma, psychology, neuroscience, mindfulness, and spirituality. And today I am going to talk about something that is deeply personal. For much of my life, I did not fully understand the impact of the experiences I had had around my body, my sexuality, and my boundaries. Like many people with complex trauma or complex PTSD, I became really good at adapting to the external world. I became good at understanding other people. I became good at explaining why someone behaved the way that they did. I became good at taking responsibility for maintaining connection, no matter what the cost to me personally. But healing has taught me something incredibly important. Understanding a perpetrator's wounds does not mean we ignore the impact of their actions. It is possible to have compassion for another person's humanity while still acknowledging that they did something that caused you severe harm. My own healing journey has included recognizing how early childhood trauma shaped the way my nervous system responded in relationships, conflict, situations where my boundaries were not respected. For many years, because of this trauma, I did not always recognize when my own needs were being overridden. Throughout my life, I have experienced many compounding situations where men pressured me sexually, crossed emotional or physical boundaries or sexual boundaries, where they did not recognize or acknowledge my hesitation, my discomfort, or the uncertainty I was expressing in my language. They never saw that as meaningful, and they continued to pressure until I gave in. There were times when I truly did not want to be sexual, but I experienced extreme pressure and expectation that their needs were more important than what I was expressing. Or I felt that the other person's needs mattered more than my own. At the time, I did not have the language to understand what was happening or to understand that this was because this is what I needed to do in order to survive childhood sexual abuse. I thought instead that maybe I was being difficult. Maybe I should make them happy. Maybe this is what love requires. And this is something that many trauma survivors understand deeply. Sometimes our nervous systems do not respond with a clear fight or flight response or a clear no. Sometimes we freeze. Sometimes we fawn, which is people-pleasing. Sometimes we disconnect from ourselves in order to maintain safety, avoid conflict, or preserve connection. And afterwards, many survivors experience and carry deep confusion. Why didn't I stop it? Why didn't I say no? Why did I go along with something I didn't really want? But trauma-informed healing has taught me that survival responses are not failures. They are the nervous system trying to protect us. And over time, I began recognizing that harm was not only in those individual moments. The deeper wound was the messaging underneath them, that my body was not fully mine. That another person's desire could become more important than my comfort and autonomy. That I was responsible for managing someone else's emotional life. And as I healed, I began realizing something extremely important. This was not only my personal story. Many women, and yes, some men, carry similar experiences. Many women have moments where they question their own boundaries. Many women have learned to prioritize that being agreeable, understanding, and compassionate towards others are important, and that we need to disconnect from our own internal voice. And this is where personal trauma meets collective trauma, because healing does not happen in isolation. We heal in relationships, we heal within communities, and we heal within cultures that shape how we understand consent, power, love, and autonomy. One of the hardest parts of healing from trauma is realizing that doing our own inner work does not mean that the external world always becomes safer. You can spend years in therapy. You can develop self-awareness. You can practice mindfulness, and you can learn to regulate your nervous system, and yet you can still feel grief when you see other people experiencing the same kinds of violations you have worked so hard to heal from, because the systems in the external world are not changing fast enough to protect victims. The grief does not mean that you are broken. It means that something matters to you. It means that there is injustice in the world and that accountability needs to happen. It means that part of you knows that people, especially victims, deserve dignity, respect, safety, and the right to belong fully to themselves, to have bodily autonomy. I think this is why conversations about bodily autonomy can feel so deeply emotional for many survivors, because we are not only having conversations about policies, technology, or social or political issues. They touch on deeper questions we carry. Are people's boundaries going to be respected? Will vulnerable people be protected? Does my experience matter? And these questions are not abstract for trauma survivors or for many other people who care about other people. They come from lived experience. They come from empathy. And I also want to say something important about healing. Healing does not mean becoming someone who is unaffected by suffering. It does not mean suppressing anger. It does not mean pretending that harm does not exist. Anger can be information. It can tell us that something is not okay. Something mattered. Something needs to change. Because healing also means learning how to hold that awareness without allowing it to consume our entire lives. For me, healing has meant my body belongs to me. My boundaries matter. My feelings are valid. I can have compassion for others without abandoning myself. I can understand somebody's trauma might be impacting their behavior without excusing the harm and while needing to hold them accountable for their actions. And I can care about creating a more compassionate world while also caring for my own nervous system. So I want to ask you, have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever looked back on an experience and realize that your boundaries were not respected? Have you ever found yourself saying yes when something inside you really wanted to say no? If you have, you are not alone. Your response was not a weakness. Your nervous system was trying to protect you. And healing begins when we finally listen to the parts of ourselves that have been waiting to be heard. I help people integrate spiritual awakening, emotional depth, and relational healing into grounded, embodied living so they can feel more connected to themselves and others. Because healing is not only about recovering from what happened. Healing is also about creating a relationship with yourself and a life where you no longer have to abandon yourself in order to survive. And maybe collectively, healing also asks us to create a world where future generations do not have to spend decades recovering from violations that should never have happened in the first place. If these reflections resonate with you, I invite you to follow and explore these ideas more deeply by reading my book, The Divine Within, Healing Ourselves to Heal the World, where I integrate psychology, neuroscience, trauma recovery, and spirituality into a compassionate framework for healing. You can also learn more about my work and how to work with me as a wellness coach or a spiritual mentor at blossomingheartwellness.com, where I help people develop greater self-understanding, nervous system awareness, and a compassionate connection with themselves and others, and if interested, the spirit world. I'm sending you deep love and appreciation for who you are. Know you are not alone.